Dear viewers, welcome to this new episode of Unmute. Today we are going to look at civil society, how it has evolved, how we have landed, where we have landed, not only in India but globally, what are the kinds of challenges we face, and what is the way forward. And we have a most appropriate guest for today's episode, Ingrid Srinath. Ingrid has worked from national situations to global situations, global spaces. She's trained at Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. She was the Chief Executive Officer of Child Rights and You. Following, she took over a major global responsibility with Civicus, an organization which monitors civil society and the situations of civil society, civic spaces all over the world. She was the Secretary General of the Civicus. Then she came back to India and established Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University in Delhi. So Ingrid has a long span of career as well as passion in the field of civil society and civil society activism. So Ingrid, welcome. Gagan and I, as you know, we will be exploring these themes with you over the next one and a half hour. So to begin with, just to understand your personal journey a little bit, what you could have got any job in any big corporate sector coming from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. What made you choose this area of work that you chose?
So I think in my generation, Minar, for women in particular, economic independence was a big driver of the choices we made. And I don't think I would have done an MBA or chosen to work in the corporate sector if that had not been weighing on my mind. But after 12 years in the corporate sector, I was just flat out bored. I could not find motivation to get out of bed in the morning if the sole outcome of all the work that we were doing was that a few shareholders were going to get richer. So it was a combination of boredom and I call it megalomania. The belief that I blame my father for having raised me to believe that one should be significant, that one should have significance, which made me look for something where one could leave a slightly more indelible mark. And as it happened, because I was coming from advertising and marketing, in many ways CRI was the logical place to go because it was an organization that understood the value of brands, had room for people like me and for the skills that I had, because I had no other real world skills apart from that.
No, but Ingrid, any life-changing event which made you, one is boredom, thing like that, but at a personal level, choosing this very difficult arena, career-wise.
So I think, so I was bored and I was having difficulty sort of, motivating myself to come to work. And my husband got very annoyed with me. He's like, you have to snap out of this. This is like going on too long, this. And I said, I don't know what to do. These are the only skills I have. So he asked me an important question. He said, when was the last time that you felt you had made a major difference? And what that did was it transported me back to my last 2 years in school, high school, where we had a program where we volunteered with the Spastic Society of India. And for the 2 years, we worked with the same child every week for 4 hours a week. We played very little role in their lives. It was their therapists and their teachers. We played games with them, taught them how to cook, helped them with their dramatics and so on. But at one point, the kid I was working with, Monisha, became quote unquote normal enough to join my school. And I cannot tell you what a feeling of accomplishment I had. I had very little to do with that transformation in Monisha, but I felt like this was the accomplishment of my life. So when he asked me that question, this is the thing that flashed into my head. And then he looks at me like, like how stupid can you be? And he says, well, then you know what you have to do.
I did a little more. Vulnerability when you experience or see vulnerability, something happens to us.
For me, it's a visceral thing. I can feel it in my gut. Yeah, I mean, just watching a news report or reading a story or just listening to something, I get a visceral response in my stomach, which there's an instant empathy. And it's perhaps more heightened than it is for other people who have learned to damp it down, who have learned to separate. I think we're all born with that natural empathy. I think life, education, upbringing teaches us to suppress it and manage it. But I think from my parents in particular, both my mom and my dad have very overdeveloped sense of justice. I mean, whether it is between us three siblings, if my mom buys something for my sister, she has to immediately buy me something of equal value. Otherwise, she can't sleep at night. Yeah. That sense of not just equality, but actual equity. Yeah. That you will operate to different standards for each sibling and so on. So I think it's just growing up in that, and school as well. It's a combination. The universe conspired to make it happen.
No, but in that sense, if you look at civil society, is what I say heart, head, and hand, and a little more on the heart, and then a balance between. And now, if you look back, this shift, 10, 15 years, what's happening to civil society in that shift? Is it more head, more hand, and less heart? Or how do you see this big shift in the last 10, 15 years?
So I used to say that the biggest thing that I gained from moving from the corporate sector to civil society was that in the corporate sector, I always felt that my employer was saying to me, Ingrid, bring your brain to work and leave the rest of that messy stuff at home. We're not interested in this other stuff that's happening in your life. When I came to civil society, I realized I could not function unless I brought my whole self to the role. That making decisions that were driven entirely by logic or reason were not going to be good decisions, that I had to bring heart, soul, mind to everything. I think we're in the process right now in the corporatization of civil society. We're importing that mindset of bring your head to work and leave the rest of the messy stuff at home. We're importing that mindset into civil society. And so the values shift. The values that are prioritized now are productivity, efficiency, profitability, growth, scale, as opposed to justice, equity, empathy, inclusion. There's a wholesale invasion of civil society, almost a hostile takeover, you could call it, from the mindset upwards. It's not just in systems and processes and resource generation tactics or something like that. It's a
mental model.
It's a mental model.
Shift in the mindset itself, which is much more deeper and which will, in a way, more difficult and more challenging to question, to reorient, to recalibrate. So basically looking at how the whole issue of philanthropy and power, because we have straddled around the words of philanthropy, policy, civil society, across all this. So when you look at that, and because you were mentioning how some of the things are being imported, or not only imported, imposed in a kind of a obsession with efficiency, obsession with scale, obsession with value for money. These are the kinds of terms which get thrown around, or ROI. What is the rate of return, cost benefit
that's the one
analysis.
That completely blows my mind.
No, so these are the words which are being thrown around, and not only thrown around, they're meant. And if you're not able to deliver across those new matrices in that sense, you are seen as out of the game and you're not in the game. So what's your way of thinking? What is it that civil society, and we use the word civil society more specifically, and Gagan keep emphasizing that we don't want to define ourselves of what we are not. We are not talking about not-for-profit sector. We are basically saying civil society, which has an important role. So when you look at all these factors that are impacting us, what do you see as the kind of a new roles or new kind of a explorations that we need to be doing? We need to be even ways of looking, especially with the whole issue of mindsets that we talked about.
So first of all, I think we need to acknowledge the scope and the severity of the threat. I think many civil society organizations are trying to navigate this new system rather than saying, sorry, this is simply not acceptable. A friend of mine and I, we call it, you have to unplug from the matrix. As long as you are trying to navigate the matrix better, you're actually strengthening the matrix. You have to literally say, in everything I do, from strategy to staffing to fundraising to communications to programming to impact measurement to everything I do, am I reinforcing, which paradigm am I reinforcing? That's one part of it, I think. The second is solidarity. No organization can push back against this overwhelming tide of technocratic philanthropy or
techno-managerial approach to managing philanthropy.
You can't push back against it, but you can push back collectively. So, there's every NGO I meet complains about CSR norms, right? Short-term thinking, shallow metrics, accountability of a very, very superficial kind. And yet we're not hearing a sector voice that says, here's how CSR could be run. Here's what a civil society driven CSR policy might look like. Including recognizing the fact that you need to recognize that business has taken over. Business always controlled business. Business now controls government. Business now controls media. And thanks to CSR and high net worth individual philanthropy, business now controls civil society. That, and then the concentration within business, so it's not business as a sector. It's like these 6 or 10 individuals that is just entirely antithetical to democracy. And if as a player in civil society, you don't fundamentally believe in democracy, because that's your primary role, guarding, protecting, strengthening democracy. It might manifest as education or work with LGBTQ groups or whatever, but your fundamental role is to ensure a functioning democracy. If you don't recognize that, then all you're doing is actually strengthening this alternate system. So solidarity, and I think just clarity on why you exist, why you do what you do. And I realize this is not easy. I'm not suggesting that this is at all easy. That for an organization that is trying to figure out where am I going to pay next month's salaries from, it's not easy to say no to the conditions being imposed by the donor. And yet, you need to at least try. You need to at least say to the donor, here's why this is a better way. More importantly, I think we need progressive philanthropy to the extent that such a thing exists, to be influencing their peers. I want to say the accountability that you're seeking is entirely superficial.
No, but Ingrid, is it losing courage? Civil society losing courage to fight this value system? Because, this was there pre-independence, this was there. We were fighting. We stopped fighting. Is the fear has gone too much? Is the courage reduced? Something has gone wrong, and we are not naming it and just putting it that market is buying, but we are allowing it to. We are selling.
I think it's short-term pragmatism versus long-term pragmatism. It's not even pragmatism versus idealism. I think it's a short-term perspective that says, what do I have to do to survive another day, as opposed to, when I do make these compromises, how am I affecting my long-term future? If you think in the long term, whether you're a business or an NGO or a political party, you will make decisions very differently from if you make them in the short. I think there's a short-termism, and it's a vicious cycle. No, The donor imposes a 12-month reporting cycle. So we then set goals based on 12 months. Funding comes in that thing. And so we sort of get onto that treadmill of the, which is a donor funder driven treadmill, without actually questioning why, or even more importantly, without offering an alternative. I mean, if the donor is judging you on cost per beneficiary and you don't think cost per beneficiary is a relevant metric, what is the alternate way of reporting or accountability that you're willing to look at? Are you willing to invest the time? I mean, I can remember some donors whom I shan't name, where we spent 18 months before we accepted their money, till they were willing to come to see things from our point of view and not come to us with some nonsense, I will paint my logo on some school wall kind of intervention. But it took 18 months, and you only had the resilience to last the 18 months because you were raising most of your money from the public. I think this dependence on big ticket philanthropy, whether it's from foreign donors, foundations, CSR, or high net worth individuals, has just reduced our resilience to the point where we're now, whatever these 5 people want me to do, I will do. I can't count on the 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 donors who would give me 1,000 rupees a year, whom I could count on through thick and thin. I can remember, when floods would happen somewhere, and I remember one donor actually writing to us saying, I realize that many donors will divert their resources to flood relief this year. So I want to double my contribution to you to make sure that your work doesn't suffer because of other donors. So I think at Civicus we did a report while I was there called Mind the Gap. And the gap we were defining was the gap between your gaze. Is your gaze now fully focused on the people giving you money, or is your gaze focused on the people from whom you gain your legitimacy? And that gap has just widened over the last 20, 30 years.
I'm still challenging you. Ultimately, who is going into these CSR? They are people from the sector. And what they've seen the ground, they've had the empathy. And then what happens when they go there? I mean, look at them, they're not naming. They all come from experience in the sector, go there, and then, like chameleons, change the game.
So I think it's just adaptive behavior, no? I mean, as a culture in India, we're not raised to challenge authority. Challenging authority in an Indian family is almost the ultimate transgression. If my father says to me, you shall not do this, and if I say, heck no, I will do it, that's worse than if I say, okay, Papa, I won't do it, but then I surreptitiously go out. That's okay in our society. To subvert authority is okay, to challenge authority is not. And the same at school, the same at work, we're just not raised to have agency, particularly in a power disparity situation. So everyone is claiming helplessness, Gagan. I mean, in the education sector, for example, students are of course helpless. They have no say in curriculum or in teaching methodologies or in affiliations and so on. Teachers say they are helpless. Yeah. That parents are the ones who want them to teach their children in a way to pass this entrance exam or to whatever, get admission to that college. Administrators are saying they are helpless. Between the government imposing things on them and parents' demands, they have no elbow room. Parents say that they are helpless because they are being driven by the market. They are just wanting their child to have the best possibility of surviving and thriving in a market-driven world. So if everybody in the system is helpless, then where is the power?
We the victims.
Yeah. It's a learned
Not
helplessness.
we the people.
It's a learned helplessness. And nobody tests it. I mean, I think for me the only difference has been that I've been willing to test it.
Push back and
show me, where are the consequences? What consequences are there actually? But I realize I can do that from the position of extreme privilege that I come from, right? I mean, I'm not going to be homeless if the government shuts down my NGO. I'm not going to be completely, powerless or friendless or whatever. Whereas for the average person, Gagan, these are not options. They're doing the things they do to put food on the table, get their children the best future they can. So it's the system we need to be fighting, not individuals.
So the CSO, civil society, becoming NGOs, with a lot of middle class people come into it because they have no other employment opportunity.
I don't know if they have no other employment opportunity, but certainly I can say the converse. Because so when I joined CRI in 1998, because we paid nothing or virtually nothing, the only people who could afford to work for us were South Bombay, South Delhi, South Bangalore people. The people from the communities we claim to serve could not afford to work for us because the typical, say, Dalit member of a community that we were working with was typically the sole wage earner for a family of 8 or a family of 14. There was no way they're going to survive on 5,000 rupees a month or 8,000 rupees a month or whatever we were paying them. So that conscious decision that says we will ensure that the people making decisions in CRI come with lived experience of the communities that we serve. But in order to do that, we had to be able to pay better. In order to be able to pay better, we had to raise more money and negotiate with our donors on what percentage of that money could go to salaries. So and then you're back in the matrix. As soon as you get to that stage, you're back plugged into the matrix. So it takes building an entire resource mobilization engine that is driven by the public, which then gives you the autonomy to pay the salaries you want to pay, to afford the people who can actually make the difference.
So, what are the leverage points we still have?
All of these are still available. I think the less you need donors' money, the more leverage you have. So, the fact that you can raise money from your own community, the fact that first of all adds to your legitimacy, it makes you more accountable to the community. It then allows you the floor, the safety net that allows you to say no to donors. I was just talking to one NGO whose board I serve on, and I'm amazed at their ability to walk away from money. They're not very large, but they're happy to make that trade-off, to say we will remain a certain size and we will not grow at some alarming rate, because we are not willing to accept money on any terms. There's no compromise on that. So is that courage? Is that stupidity? I don't know. Foolhardiness? They could be, a national organization instead of which they choose to stay local. But I admire the principled approach that they're taking to this. Say we will not be driven. And it's not just the kind of programs, right? It's even the thematic areas. It's like there's a flavor of the year, no? One year it's HIV/AIDS, another year it's climate, another year it's mental health, something or the other. This whole idea that your organization mission will drift in the direction of where the money is coming from, rather than saying, this is my mission, I now have to attract money to this mission. I think, and one of the answers to your question is in the storytelling, in the brand building. Because if you stand for something, then these donors, the ones who actually value social justice, the ones who value strengthening, will be drawn to you. But if you're sitting there doing this excellent work but nobody knows about it,
then it doesn't help.
It doesn't help. So building that narrative is critical.
So because we have also talked about CSR quite a bit, but let's go a little bit deep into the CSR. Whether making CSR mandatory, is that actually helping or is that not helping? I think that's a fundamental question.
And we were debating
between two of us, whether it's a good idea to have the mandate, does it help, doesn't it help? Does that still help in maintaining? Of course, you mentioned the whole issue of values, solidarity, compassion, which we believe are the critical values for any philanthropy, whether it is what route, whether CSR or philanthropic institutions. The challenge is whether those values have become more instrumentalization because of its mandatory nature is one question. Second, you also mentioned that now, because CSR is also market in one sense, so the policy autonomy that the civil society had, the kind of a agenda autonomy. So you are continuously adjusting your agendas, your policies to suit the donor, right? So what's the way out? And I think it is going to continue this tightening and putting you in particular kinds of boxes. So what's your, because you have been engaging with a range of CSR donors also.
And instead of willingness, it's compliance.
Compliance, yeah.
So I think we have to go back to the origins of CSR, the way it is legislated in India. 2013, this law gets passed. 2011, Manmohan Singh goes to CII and talks about quotas in the private sector. The corporate sector is panic-stricken. Yeah. See, they offer the CSR carrot.
The carrot, yeah.
As a way to escape actual social responsibility. And not just in terms of quotas, but in terms of human rights in the supply chain, ecological and environmental impacts of what they do. All of that talk, there was this huge talk about corporates and human rights, for example, corporate codes of conduct, legislating human rights in the corporate space, all just vanish overnight and is replaced by this, I will pay you 2% of my profits every year, you will leave me alone to do whatever I want. Okay, that's the trade-off, the deal that is done. So its antecedents itself are extremely foul. It did not come out of great social intent or altruism or anything like that. Then comes the fact that when a third of the resources available to civil society comes from that sector, then willy-nilly, in a sense, you will find yourself trapped into this short-term, easy-to-measure, photogenic, I call it, philanthropy, the stuff that looks good on the annual report and the website, and when I can take my international partners to visit a program that is within driving distance of my headquarters, where I can get employees to work. Once you make it mandatory, the nature of the corporate, the DNA of the corporate is such that it will seek to maximize the gains from that investment in terms of employee motivation, branding, marketing, etc., etc. They also then pull off another trick there, right, which is they define what philanthropy this money can go towards. And so you end up with a list of these are legitimate CSR activities, which excludes all forms of rights-based work, all forms of advocacy and campaigning, all forms of research and policy work, etc. So in one fell swoop, they get liberated from actual social responsibility. Yeah. They get to all these side benefits. The state gets a complete almost shutting down, silencing of the noisy part of civil society that actually keeps raising awkward questions. It's a win-win-win for state and market, and it's a complete loss of purpose to civil society. It's also used to justify foreign funding being shut down, saying, up to we don't need foreign funding because we have CSR. Civil society organizations into these short-term, easy-to-measure, trendy causes, whether or not they believe in them. Right. This is what they have to do to survive.
So, you bring in foreign funding, and is this FCI, is it a hula and a big thing? Or do you think it really will kill civic space? Will it kill voices? Or as you rightly earlier said, and I somewhere agree with you, that really rights-based work should be community funded in a larger way. But we have created fear psychosis with FCRA. Will it really change civic space work?
I think what the new FCRA, the amended FCRA has done is violate civil society's right to receive resources from wherever it chooses, subject of course to normal considerations of national security and so on. And this is uncontested, right? The UN Special Rapporteur, the International Commission of Jurists, ICNL, Civicus, everybody has pointed out that this is a violation of our constitution and it's a violation of our treaty obligations at various levels. And I think if we fail to defend that right, then what's the next right that gets taken away? No, it's a slippery slope. So you have to defend it even just on the principle of the right. The second is there are causes that the public may not be willing yet to support. I'm thinking, for example, of LGBTQ causes back in the 1990s, 1980s, right? The only people who were funding LGBTQ issues and organizations were foreign funders. And it took that catalytic funding from them to build the institutions in that community that then became strong enough to advocate and to start raising money locally. But it's a continuum. So what are the issues that we simply will not get raised because those communities are too small or too marginalized to be able to get a voice at the moment? So those are the two main benefits, I think. But also before the amendment, many of the recipients of FCR, these large organizations that you're referring to, were onward granting to smaller organizations who could not access international donors, did not have the fundraising teams or the comms teams or whatever to apply, did not even have the bandwidth to say who's issuing what request for proposals where, right? So there was a huge intermediary role being played that made international money accessible to smaller grassroots organizations who might not otherwise. So this, and then you have this problem of what you refer to, which is the loss of FCRA results in a kind of demonization of the organization, so that everybody, including the public at large, now starts to view this organization with some suspicion. And it's not just donors. I mean, when I was at HEVOS, for example, we had difficulty opening a bank account. Banks didn't want to open an account for us because they felt that they might get into trouble. My staff had difficulty getting accommodation. People would be, oh, you work for one of those foreign NGOs, I'm not sure that I can rent my room or flat out to you. People were having difficulty getting bank loans. So somebody wanted to buy a motorcycle and the bank thought that because he works at a foreign NGO, he's not a good credit risk. Law firms don't want to work with you. Chartered accountants don't. So loss of FCRA paralyzes the organization 360 degrees. This is not just a funding issue. And we need to see it as such. And the demonstration effect, the chilling effect, is the biggest impact. Because if it can happen to Greenpeace and Amnesty and Oxfam and big international names like that, then who am I, this small organization, to challenge it, right? So it has the effect of silencing the whole sector, not just the ones that are targeted. And I mean, I've been told as much by senior bureaucrats. I can remember having this conversation where Delhi High Court had just ruled in favor of Greenpeace, calling the government's actions arbitrary, illegal and unconstitutional. I was meeting somebody senior at the ministry that day, and I said, so, what is this judgment going to change? And he just shrugs. So I said, seriously, nothing? He's like, a message had to be sent, it has been sent.
Ingrid, let's explore this social stock exchange. And I know you are part of the design team, I've been recently with 2 or 3 organizations which have applied for it and got BSc, now NSc. It's quite complex. I mean, from a point of public accountability, it's a great idea. But all the questions are pushing market frameworks onto the thing quite a bit. return on investment. All these questions are being asked. Whether you recommend it or not, they're asking that. On the other hand, I see some advantage. Like, the zero coupon rate can be bought by individuals. So what you were saying, individuals investing in it. But on the other hand, only the big ones can really take on that. Do you think this will further build the market hegemony on the civil society? Or will it free, or both? If yes, what's the polarities there as you see it, and what needs to be changed? Because now they are talking that every CSR will give a certain percentage in the success. So all that is going on and is fairly blurred at the moment. How do you see the trajectory?
So I think there are two major potential gains from a platform like the social stock exchange. The first is raising the credibility of the sector at large. This is what stock exchanges did for the corporate sector. The corporate sector, business was the Wild West. All kinds of scams, scandals, people running away with people's money, whatever. What stock exchanges did by creating standardized reporting frameworks and by establishing a kind of a regulator was give legitimacy to business. I believe 0.03% of companies in India are listed on a stock exchange. But for that tiny fraction being listed on the stock exchange, the whole sector is seen as credible and legitimate. So to me, that's the big payoff, potential payoff of a social stock exchange. The second one is to open up new pools of capital, not just foundations and CSR, but people who've not thought of philanthropy, including the mega millions, crores of Indians who invest in the stock market, but who don't think about philanthropy. So the idea that you can package a series of products, what is a zero coupon, zero principal instrument? It's a grant, okay, but it's wearing a pinstriped suit now and it's speaking a certain kind of language. Yeah. So if you can actually open up new pools of capital, so for example, the folk at Zerodha, the Kamats, they would like to see a day when social stock exchange instruments are listed on their app in the same way as stock market instruments are listed on their app. And that their app, think about the number of people they reach, that when you're scrolling through saying what are the new issues, what are the whatever, that you're also seeing these, right? So that to me is the core of it. Where it fails right now is again, we have replicated the narrowness of the definition that CSR did. In fact, we opened it up a little. So it's a little wider actually than CSR. There's some room for maneuver there. You can't still do human rights, for example. You can't still do, but you can do accountability. And so there's a way actually of doing some of those things. The second thing it does is donors are content with one financial audit. That not each donor, some donors do their own financial audit, but by and large, your chartered accountant does your financial audit and they're fine. The social stock exchange offers you the possibility, the requirement that you do a third party impact audit. But the advantage here is that you could actually do one audit and it would satisfy all your donors. You would not have to do half a dozen different audits for different donors, is the intent.
Is the intent, yeah.
And it's a third party audit and therefore carries a greater, and this auditor has to be certified as an impact auditor by the Chartered Accountants Institute. So if it actually liberates organizations from having to submit to half a dozen donor audits, then I think it would be a good thing. It will also, I think, be like a little seal of approval. No, I got a third party impact audit. Will add to credibility for individual organizations as well as for the sector at large. The final thing there is, I think a lot of big grants come with so many strings attached. People are micromanaging your budget. how much did you spend on tea for that partner meeting, and how much was on conveyance, and how much, all the instruments on the social stock exchange do not allow for that. You present a project proposal, a donor buys into the goals that you're going to achieve, and all you have to do now is deliver those goals. What happens, it's a black box between check being written and outcomes being reported. How you spend that money? Do you do research? Do you spend it on salaries? Do you spend it on training? Do you spend it on, is up to you. So there's a greater deal of strategic autonomy in the instruments that the social stock exchange provides than in, and I don't see the market orientation except in terms of, if you're going to attract these new investors, then you're going to have to speak their language. But there's no market orientation in terms, certainly it's easier to raise money if you're doing direct service delivery in a popular cause. So, hypothetically, given the nature of investors in our country, if I was doing feeding children in Gujarat, might be a easier cause to raise money for than raising money for some indigenous community in Meghalaya or something like that.
But till now, I think it's been now a couple of months, 1 year, about 1.5 years, it's only 18 organizations which have been able to raise some money.
So this is a problem. There's a problem in terms of, I think when you take a concept like this and then you try and force fit it into something like SEBI, you get into a culture clash there which is quite rough. They are used to prospectuses being of a certain kind, they are used to certain quantums being minimum amounts, etc., etc. They're used to certain kinds of reporting cycles, and it's taking them a long while to adjust to this new way of thinking. And unfortunately, as far as I know, there's nobody driving it. What this needs is some sort of very entrepreneurial minded person at each of the exchanges to say, this is my project and I will do what's needed. I will speak to the chair of the board if necessary. I will lobby with donors if necessarily. I will help non-profits with. So you've got NABARD sitting there on the capacity building fund. You've got SEBI sitting there with regulations, and the pieces haven't gelled together because there isn't somebody to bring them together.
Which is in a sense the link thing which you always say. You talk of knowledge, network, norm, narrative. This is your piece.
But I have 4 C's and I have 4 N's.
Yeah. And, but then, and for me, the last one, and I have often called you for that, and you say it so brilliantly, we have not built a narrative and we have not invested in a narrative. Our networks are not interdisciplinary, intersectional. They are very donor-driven and just for one single purpose. I mean, where have we failed and what we should do more to build the sector's resilience and its true mission in terms of social justice, human rights and things like that.
So rather than speak of this theoretically or conceptually, let's start with a real life example of what's happening in the United States right now. Because they have high functioning sector bodies like the National Council for Nonprofits, they have been able to push back legally. So their CEO Diane Yentl is in court or in a congressional hearing every week. They have been able to put out a campaign to the general public saying, who are these nonprofits? What is a non? And relating it to the life of everyday citizens. It's that animal shelter, it's that. So legally, normatively, and narrative-wise, there's a similar network of funders that has come together. Over 700 foundations have signed up to a pledge to fight any attack on philanthropy or civil society. One of the things they've been able to do is shift the norms on payouts. So as you probably know, US philanthropies are only required to pay out a minimum of 5% of their endowment value each year. Through leadership of some foundations, the norm has shifted. So now you're being encouraged to pay out much more than the minimum. Right? So when you have the networks, then you can influence the norms, and then you can build a coherent narrative. There's a real life example unfolding in front of us as we speak right now in the US. The second part of this is no individual organization or even group of organizations has the wherewithal, for example, to do a national research study. If you look at when CSIP did the How India Gives study, it's a sample of 81,000 households across 20 states covering everyone from rural to elite. No individual organization or group of organizations can hope to pull that off, and it's an annual study. So that means you got to pay for it in double-digit lakhs every year. There was that excellent report that was put together called A Million Missions, I think, by Dasra and Matthew and ISDM and others. It hasn't reached anyone. I mean, I sometimes joke that even the people who are written about in the report haven't read the report. Because it's, that's not a form in which people absorb information in 2025, right? If you had a sector body or you had somebody responsible who wakes up every morning with the sole question of how am I going to promote the sector's interest today, somebody would be making that into digestible chunks of information, putting it out there on social media multiple times a day, etc. Somebody would be scanning the environment to spot innovation happening in different parts of the country and say, here's somebody who's cracked the puzzle of CSR, or here's somebody who's figured out how to use AI in an ethical manner. We have none of that. We have no ability to make sense of what is happening around us. We have no ability to tell our own story. We have no ability to push back against norms and regulations. And all of this in some ways harks back to narratives. The knowledge piece I talked about as well in terms of the data and just, I mean, imagine being able to go to a site and say, who else is working with indigenous rights in Chhattisgarh, for example? Rather than having to rely on word of mouth and personal networks and stuff like that, who has funded gender-related causes in Jharkhand? And to be able to just pull that down at one click, rather than have to go through some tomes of CSR data, all of which is suspect in the first place.
Yeah, but that really needs huge investment and leadership at not just an organizational level, but
so this is what all of us who are of a certain age should be focusing on. If you're no longer doing operating line responsibilities in your organization, then this would be a worthwhile cause for us to come together and say, this is where we're going to exercise our leadership. I think some of the people who succeed us will also be happy if we get out of their hair.
Yeah, I agree. I think give way to the younger gen. And but again, the practicality of it,
Gagan, there are countries, I mean, when I was at Civicus, I would be ashamed. Small, relatively poor countries with nascent civil societies had better functioning industry associations than we who have been investing in this for 50 years.
No, I'm saying just the other way around. We are just too big.
Well, start at the state level. I mean, there's some excellent work happening on this in Karnataka, for example. There's a well-functioning network of NGOs there. Do that at the state level in multiple states. How did we build any of the movements that have actually impacted people in our country? Whether it's right to information, right to education, right to food, Narega, all of these were built bottom up. And they did not take huge sums of money. In fact, if you remember, the first decision that the RTI campaign took was actually, we will accept no philanthropy. And look at their impact and look at the footprint that they've had compared to the people who got the hundreds of crores from philanthropy. I'm not absolving philanthropy. I think philanthropy needs to invest in strengthening the ecosystem and building the ecosystem. But I'm saying it's not going to happen if we leave it to philanthropy.
Yeah, but the idea, even the market philanthropy is so much competitive in their
So on this, I have direct evidence. There are funders who are willing to fund a platform of NGOs that's across the sector. And you can start, for example, by delivering shared services. Right? You've got this health insurance thing that NFI is doing. Add to it just one-stop shop on regulations. Because right now, Account Aid, Center for Advancement of Philanthropy, there's 5.5 people, FMSF, all tirelessly working day after day to put out this information for free. And yet, if you're a new organization setting up in Satara, you have no way of knowing where to go to find this information. Right? So, imagine if there was a one-stop shop that said, I can get information easily, it's reliable information, it's updated. I want to do a conflict of interest policy, I can download a template. I want to do a sexual harassment policy, I can download a template. Think about the amount of time we waste on reinventing this wheel for each of us.
Duplication,
so
all
even if you
along,
just start with shared services, you would still be able to build a degree of solidarity and a degree of connectedness on which you could then build advocacy. If you start by saying, I'm only interested in organizations that are willing to challenge the government head on, then this is a non-starter of an idea. From a funding point of view and from a membership point of view, because NGOs are so afraid right now of being seen to be aligned with anything that the government would frown upon.
But that brings me to our relationship with academic institutions. Why are we not easily collaborating with at least a few? I mean, I know 70% of them have been, compromised.
70 is a low percentage.
It's not
taken over, hijacked, or whatever.
But there are still quite a few. What's the mistrust there?
I don't think it's mistrust there. I think it's just a lack of awareness of each other. I mean, at CSIP, because some of us came from civil society and were practitioners and not just academics, we were able to bridge that gap a little bit. But for the pure academic, they don't necessarily have the civil society networks to actually bridge that gap. And civil society doesn't know who's working on what. So for example, one of the cool things we did there was this research fellowship, right? Which suddenly said, there is a viable career stream in doing research on civil society and philanthropy. Because right now, if you're thinking about what your PhD topic is going to be, philanthropy won't even feature on your shortlist. Because who's offering PhDs in philanthropy or in civil society for that matter? So you really need, I think that's the role that academics can play, which is sort of plant a flag out there and say, this is where you can come if you're looking for this kind of assistance.
You tried CSIP.
And I mean, apart from my own personal reasons for leaving, I don't think there's any reason why that can't continue. I mean, they are, for example, about to launch the 3rd round of the How India Gives study, right? The research fellowships continue. They've opened up new fellowships of other kinds. So, now if you were to be able to multiply that by 100 across different universities in India, then you would have a serious academic input. But the academic center has a fantastic advantage, right? It's seen as independent.
But
it's
I
seen
think
as rigorous.
What you say is very important. Organizations of certain stature who have been led by leadership, is the best for them to move out and move into this space.
Correct.
It will do good to both. I think that's a very good point.
That's a good message. So we have touched this piece through the whole conversation. But if I ask you to give us, from your perspective, those 3 to 5 non-negotiables, if this relationship between the civil society, business or market and the state needs to be working in the interest, and it's not like some large global things, consistent with the constitutional objectives, consistent with the directive principles, consistent with the chapter on rights in our own constitution in India. What would be those 3 to 5 non-negotiables from your perspective? Very, very briefly, if you can just outline so that viewers can say, oh, these are critical things that I need to be looking at.
So I would put sector solidarity at the top. I don't think anything else can be achieved without sector solidarity, whatever form that takes. It could be a national association, it could be a loose coalition, whatever. Yeah, but you need sector solidarity, and importantly, you need sector solidarity across the different kinds. So there's the whole faith-inspired sector. There's a large component of civil society that is driven by religious beliefs. Yes. There is the whole sector that is this more technocratic part of the sector, and then there's what you're calling, pre-1980s kind of civil society, from the so-called heydays of civil society, the more grassroots, rights-based, justice-driven. The bridges we build have to be across those, because that gives us the numbers and the clout and the access to communities and to governments and to businesses that we don't have on our own. And as long as they can keep pitting us against each other in this like Hunger Games kind of race for survival, we can't make it. I think a serious dialogue between philanthropy and non-profits or civil society organizations, a space for that, and that's another role that academic institutions can play very well, because they have the neutrality and the independence to bring together these many different stakeholders, where we are able to honestly table the issues we have on both sides, because I'm sure there's like enough issues from philanthropy as well, and say where can we find common ground? We don't have to agree on everything. I don't have to approve of every single action and decision that you've taken, but is there an agenda that we agree on is critical, which is something as minimal as civil society is a critical component of a functioning democracy and should therefore be supported. Yeah. And the third one is data, because it would take something as simple as the income tax department receives all our tax returns. Okay? They know every ATG application, every ATG approval, every tax return filed with 12A and 80. Okay? Aggregating those numbers or anonymizing those numbers in a way that doesn't have personal data or doesn't allow for individual organizations to be targeted. That could be a huge service to say, here's the size, scale, diversity, composition of the tax-paying part or the tax-exempt part of civil society, at least that part. FCRA data has been whooshed out of public scrutiny. Can we lobby to get that back? The government's response was, nobody needs the data. Let's establish that, yes, we do need the data, and that we have a right to it, not just that. Could somebody then look at FCRA data? CSR data is quite thorough. CSR data, FCRA data, and income tax data, triangulate it and make sense of it in a way that we get a sense of the size and shape of the sector. Yeah. The national accounts. Okay, Bollywood is an industry, but civil society is not a sector. Okay? How do we get the people who do national accounts to just pull out from their aggregate numbers, what they call the household sector? Can we pull out a bit that says this is the number, for example, the amount of employment being generated? All of that will come from the national accounts. Contribution to GDP will come from the national accounts. Or what Vijay Mahajan has been talking about for the longest time, can we get in the constitution recognition of this sector as a sector? Can it be called out by name? Can it not just be some voluntary sector, which makes it sound like a bunch of well-meaning do-gooders who are floating around? Can it be called out? Because if you call it out as a sector, then the national accounts will have to report it. The data will become more accessible. So I think those three for me, solidarity, dialogue, and data would be the three that I would list.
No, as always, Ingrid, thank you very much for this time that we spent together. I think it's a interesting, reflective conversation. It hopefully will allow our viewers to have that deep sense of insights in some of the things that you have shared. some of these trends that you outlined are not Indian trends. They are global in that sense, in various forms and
ahead of
fashions.
the curve.
Yeah, maybe we were ahead of the curve, and that's why we face the serious challenges that we face in this context.
I think you've also said there are roles for different people. Yeah. And we need to look at the sector much more holistically and not get in the divisive walls that we have constructed.
And silos, yeah.
I met this woman earlier in the year called Loretta Ross. She's civil rights, feminist, all kinds of activism all her whole life, African American in the US. And she has this concept called calling in. And she said, we're so good in civil society at calling each other out. We're saying, you're
like
too
that.
corporatized, you're too in bed with government, you made this one unfortunate quote from some discredited person now. We're very good at calling each other out. She offers the possibility that everyone out there falls into 4 categories. They are either proven allies or they're problematic allies, which is on many things we agree, but there are some sticking points. There are potential allies, which is people who could be allies, but we haven't bothered to reach out to them. And the 4th are psychopaths. Which is, apart from the psychopaths, everybody is a potential. You can call them in rather than calling them out.
That's a good thing to. So, dear viewers, calling in is the new vocation in terms of civil society. Thank you very much for
Minar.
joining
Thank you,
us.
Gagan. Thank you for having me.